since my bubble is so limited these days, it's really great to meet new people, especially this community of thinkers and creators. And earlier I was hearing about the few babies that are in the group. It's great to hear that Andy is expecting a baby soon, so congratulations to you. I also have to say I'm grateful to Ruchi for introducing me to this group. Ruchi and her husband, by the way, Aditya, recently became generous supporters of KQED. And of course, I want to thank you, Ashley, for making today possible. I want to make this a little bit educational about public media and KQED, as well as Ashley said, as where KQED is headed. And hopefully you got a sense from the subject line of my presentation, Redefining Public Media. This is a new vision that I put in place for KQED. And as Ashley said, please do chime in with any comments or questions, and I'll try to address those along the way. And of course, we'll leave room for discussion at the end. I want to acknowledge my colleague, Chris Perius. He's our Senior Director of Foundation and Government Support. He's going to drive the deck so I can look out for your comments and questions. And anyway, here's how I want to frame the conversation. I think to understand our future, it's important to know who we are, how we serve the community, and what we've learned in the most, as Ashley said, most extraordinary of circumstances, and how those circumstances and what we've learned have shaped our strategy. And I really wish someone would have given me a heads up as to what was coming, and who knows what's going to come in 2021. Ashley shared out my bio and gave me a nice introduction, but let me start briefly with who I am and just a little bit of personal background. As Ashley mentioned, been in public media for, quarter century, and I've been at KQED. I've started my 20th year. So I know the organization inside and out. I came in as a television executive producer, then had the opportunity to grow and become chief content officer, chief operating officer. I know the industry well. I'm on the board of directors for PBS, as well as American Documentary Incorporated. That's the production company that provides POV. That is one of PBS's icon documentary series. I'm also on the board of directors of Public Radio Exchange, also a distributor of public radio programming and podcasts. I feel like I know the Bay Area community from events. I also serve on the boards of Silicon Valley Leadership Group and Joint Venture Silicon Valley. And I think the thing I'm most proud of is I was once a youth soccer and baseball coach for more than a decade. I mentioned that last point because the Bay Area, Oakland, the 510, the five and dime, as they say, is my home now. I've lived here longer than my hometown of Grosse Pointe, Michigan. And just to get really personal, I'm first generation Filipino. My dad grew up as the youngest of 5 siblings in a very poor province, became an engineer, and for his entire life was sending money back to support his family. My mom, the eldest of 9 kids, she was a doctor in the inner city community clinic in Detroit. So you can only imagine how brave and strong she is. And to this day, I genuinely fear her. I share my parents' background because they instilled in me of the value of working with a purpose and serving the community. And really that is what makes me tick and why I believe and I love KQED. As Ashley mentioned, I became KQED's 10th president. That happened in April of 2019. And I'll just say it was an amazing moment for me. Speaking of community, I got a dozen emails from the community, especially the Filipino community, who just shared how proud and grateful they are that I'm representing them at such a treasured institution. Though if I'm being honest, probably a number of those emails came from my mom's church friends, but I think count all the same. Now, Chris, I'm gonna ask Chris to go ahead and share the deck so I can shift focus over to KQED. There you go. Simply, KQED is the public media, independent, non-commercial resource for the Bay Area. We are an almost 70-year-old institution with a very deep history in television and radio broadcast. Our mission, as you see it there, is to inform, inspire, and involve. And we inform with trusted information, facts, accuracy, and truth, which exists, depth, context, and analysis to the pressing issues of the day. We inspire with stories about the human experience, stories that we believe move people intellectually and emotionally. We aspire to have our stories build empathy, foster understanding, and cultivate respect. And then finally, we involve our community by trying to spark bold conversation, spirited debate, to identify where we intersect as opposed to where we diverge. And ultimately, we strive to help individuals find common ground despite the differences we may have. KQED was born. Join me, if you will, on a journey back in history. KQED was born in 1953. James Day and Jonathan Rice are our founders, but actually our FCC license, this is interesting, was secured by the heads of leading educational institutions, Stanford, Cal, SF State, West Contra Costa and SF Unified School Districts, Alameda and Sonoma County of Educations. And I share that because education, or rather educational programming, is in our DNA. The idea that media can be used for a force for good to help our audiences, our community achieve their full potential. KQED was launched, as you see, first, and then KQED FM came in 1969, 51 years old. Today, we are one of about 350 member PBS stations and one of about 265 member NPR stations. PBS and NPR are primarily distributors of content. NPR produces some programming. So as a member station, we pay dues for that programming. 95% of what you see on KQED is actually acquired programming, and more than 2/3 of that, 95%, comes from PBS. Programs hopefully you're familiar with, like PBS NewsHour, Frontline, Nova, American Experience. And then about less than 5% is produced by KQED. Check Please Bay Area, our most popular program, restaurant review series, and KQED Newsrooms is another one. And then on radio, about 80% is acquired, mostly from NPR. Morning Edition, I'm sure you're familiar with, All Things Considered. And about 20%, a higher percentage, comes from KQED. Our 85 daily newscasts a week, Perspectives, Forum. If you didn't hear, by the way, Michael Krasny is retiring in February. We're doing a national search for a new host. And then our Thursday evening program, Political Breakdown. We are currently in the middle of a multi-year fundraising initiative called Campaign 21, which I should mention. I know the slide says KQED original content, but it's important to mention we launched this campaign back in 2013, and we launched it so that we could digitally transform, simply to become as great at digital as we are at broadcast. The overall financial goal for the campaign is $135 million, the most ambitious campaign in public media, at least on the local station level. We've just crossed the $126 million mark. We invested about $45 million to expand original local productions and coverage of news, art, science, education, with a focus on digital production, distribution, and infrastructure. So capacity and staff that we've never had before. Digital video producers, podcast producers, product managers, and social media specialists. And as you see there at the bottom, we have 330 full or part-time regular staff, and close to half of our staff work in content, while about 2/3 of our content staff are journalists. So what I want you to take away from that is just the emphasis that we've invested in local, when local journalism, specifically newspapers, have been shrinking. I'm sure you've heard about the crisis in local journalism. And for us, this investment in digital and local has been just a business imperative, just our way to keep up with the changes in technologies and to keep pace with your needs. We work in an environment where all of you are the on-demand deciders of what you want to see, what you want to hear, what you want to read, when you want to do it, where you want to do it. So you saw our long history on the previous couple slides ago, our long history in broadcast. Today, we don't talk just about television and radio, but we can talk about digital video, audio, text, social media. And I like to say, if content is king, then distribution is King Kong. And Ashley, thanks for that comment. We are all kind of torn up about Michael Krasny retiring after 28 years. Oh, I actually haven't heard him speak about whales. Something I got to ask him about after all these years. Anyway, thanks for recognizing Michael. He has an unbelievable bandwidth for reading all those books. He really reads all those books, voracious appetite. Anyway, here's a look at our business model. And to set this up, our investment in local and digital in service of the community, these investments have really put us in a unique position of strength as a local media organization, especially in this moment, 2020, which feels like it's still happening, a moment when our community is so dependent on local news, information, and facts in the middle of a pandemic that is not yet under control. Back in June, when the Black Lives Matter protests broke out, life-saving coverage during the wildfire season, which is longer and longer every year. And then in November, we delivered trusted election coverage and resources so people could actively and responsibly participate. And I need to mention, I talked earlier about education being our DNA. We have the largest education team on a local level in public media. I think at this point, 20 people. And that team has been filling learning gaps with a statewide learning plan on television and online for homebound students and teachers. And you all know just how disrupted the formal education system has been. So anyway, back to the business model. The business outcome of who we are, what we do, and how we serve people is a business model that commercial media outlets are vying for. As you see there, more than 60% of our support comes from individual contributors or members. Members to us are subscribers to commercial media outlets like New York Times or Washington Post. But the distinction is that our members support us because they value what we do, as opposed to becoming a member simply to get a newsletter, for example. By the way, you can see at the smallest, second smallest piece of the pie there, people are surprised to hear that only 8% of our budget comes from the federal government. If I had a headline for 2020, it would be, just as we've stepped up for the community is coming through for us. Our total membership today has grown by about 5%, and we are a little over 250,000 members. It's a place we've never been, and the most members of any local media organization, public media organization. So that's my headline. I guess my greatest learning over the last year is the affirmation that KQED is an essential service in this time of deep division and partisanship and growing gaps in economic opportunity, equity, and equality. And at a time when it feels like the health of our, well, not doesn't feel like, the health of our citizens and the health of our democracy hang in the balance. This is what we're built for, because in times of crisis, people focus on essential needs such as food, water, shelter, medicine, and trusted information and quality programming. That's what we do. And our values embodied in our work, we believe, differentiate us from a crowded and confusing media landscape. So I've talked about, where we've come from, where we are now, how we're doing. Let me talk a little bit about where we're headed. This is our new vision. And what follows are slides to give you an overview of our strategic plan. And our vision and our strategic plan are based on this idea that we are an essential community service. But more than that, in this moment, we have an opportunity and a responsibility to bring people together and stand with our community to create a more just society. So our vision, you see it there, is to redefine public media for the Bay Area. More inclusive, participatory, and truly powered by the community. And by the way, that word redefine doesn't mean we're going to change who we are and what we stand for, but it is just honest recognition or acknowledgement that we need to look at ourselves in ways we've never had before and change to better reflect and include those who aren't heard or feel left out. So our vision will expand our work in community engagement and participation. Here's a look at our plan. There's the vision up top, and we have 4 strategic objectives to make this vision a reality. just generally, our vision is going to drive our programming, the stories we do, the people we hire. It's going to push us to find ways to build relationships with younger and more diverse audiences. And we're going to cultivate, because we have to cultivate new supporters. So I'm going to touch on each of these objectives, starting on the north there. The first one is the heart of what we do. And we're going to double down, as they say, to differentiate ourselves, further differentiate ourselves as a source of trusted journalism. Let me just say, when we talk about journalism at KQED, we do it, we call it service journalism. That is, we do it in service to the public. We hold people, systems, and institutions accountable. As I said earlier, facts, accuracy, truth, depth, context, analysis, on defining issues like affordable housing, climate change, social justice, just to name a few. So again, I've said this a few times, but who we are and what we stand for are our competitive advantages. Our second strategic objective is all about our future. And this is where we need to change. It's about cultivating the next generation. And the pathway there is digital, but it's more than just excelling at where, when, and whatever device being there. Because the next generation, they're digital natives. I have 2 college kids. I have a high school nephew. They're way more technologically savvy than me. They're makers, they're social, they're visual, they want to be heard. I cannot imagine, Ashley and Andy, what your kids are going to be like. Probably going to have something implanted in their brains when they get older. These digital natives are makers, they're social, as I said. And in an online world, everyone can be a producer, a provider, or a source. And we've only just begun to explore digital platforms for inclusion and community participation. You know, the world used to be, we would push out our content and we would decide what you needed to watch. Now it's about the opportunity, it's about curating and uplifting voices so we can actually reflect what people want and what people need. Our third objective is all about our financial sustainability. I mentioned earlier, 250,000 members, and that is an incredible, solid foundation. But I'll tell you, only 1 in 10 people who watch or listen, 1 in 10, actually are members. And our core members are older and getting older by the minute. So in addition to attracting younger and more diverse audiences, just starting with building a relationship, got to find a way to bring them value so they'll support us. So we need to adapt and evolve our membership model. It may not be the $12 a month, you know, for 12 months. And it's certainly not going to be giving the DVD or tote bag. Got to figure out different ways to bring value and put in place tools and products that more effectively engage our donors and attract new donors. And you know, I think the real opportunity is to be able to personalize and customize our primary platform, KQED.org, so that when people log in, and we just introduced user login onto our site, when they log in, we can tee up what we know based on the data we've received on what they're reading, what they're watching, what they're listening. We can tee up a better experience for them on KQED.org. And we've just begun that work. And by the way, we're a little bit behind, right? And it's hard to keep pace. Finally, while the heart of what we do is content, the lifeblood of KQED is our staff, the 330 staff that I mentioned earlier. And I talked about learning that we're an essential service. My greatest learning internally is you have to care for, support, and empower the people, because you're not going to get anywhere without the people. And we're going to hire diverse staff, as I mentioned earlier, to ensure that our programming and our coverage reflects the Bay Area's many diverse communities. And I can say objectively that we have the best talent in public media. They are mission-driven, dedicated, and committed, and in the most challenging of times, they've stepped up in new and creative ways. 95% of our staff are working from home. Michael Krasny is hosting Forum in his living room. Our morning anchor, Brian Watt, I think is in his garage or his basement, right? So our teams have found ways to be resilient in order to serve our community. So our great challenge, I mean, you've seen this at news organizations, are the calls for diversity, equity, anti-racism practice within news departments. And the fact that we have to give everyone a sense of belonging, that is one of our greatest challenges moving forward. I said earlier that we're built for this, and I really do believe this is our moment to combine our journalism, our media, our distribution platforms, our people, and our place for the common good. So, in the last couple minutes, let me talk a little bit about place, because if you recall earlier, I talked about this ambitious $135 million campaign, and I shared with you $45 million of investments in digital staff and production. The balance of that campaign is going into the physical transformation of KQED. I don't know if any of you have been to 2601 Mariposa. It does not look like this. This is a rendering of our new building. We're in the middle of a major renovation. This is a rendering of that building. Again, the physical transformation of our place. And the groundbreaking began last September. We're about 2/3 of the way through construction, and it's going to be more than just a building, a beautiful building. We're calling it a place of trust. It's going to be a modern facility with updated media technology for production and distribution. But more importantly, it's going to reflect our vision for more inclusion and more participation. It's going to be more accessible. So Chris, if you could advance to the next slide. This is a look at our atrium. And the previous slide, you saw all those windows. I mean, just from a design perspective, making it more accessible and more open. And ultimately, our new building is not just about what we do in that building for the community. It's going to be about engaging with the community for the community. So our new headquarters is going to offer the opportunity to invite members of our community to be part of our work and use our space. And we have 3 intentionally designed event spaces like that atrium, as you see there, 3 spaces from bottom to top. And we're going to convert our large production studio. We have 2 production studios. This is what it's going to look like. And we're going to call it the Commons. And, we do about 70 to 80 public events, mostly out and about in the Bay Area. But we're going to do that number in this space. And it's going to be our way to, as I said earlier, involve our community in dialogue and debate so that they can not only connect with us and our journalists and our stories, but connect with each other. And personal connection, not what we're doing right now, virtually. Personal connection is incredibly important to strengthen community. And then the last slide I will share with you is our outdoor event space on the rooftop. Our staff for years have been asking for us to build out on the roof. I don't know how many days it's going to be this clear and warm in San Francisco. I also want you to see just how diverse and happy all the people are visiting us that we're including in our space. So that's it for my presentation as to who we are, how we're doing now, and where we're headed in the future. I'm happy to take any questions if you have any, or we can talk more about, or we can hear from Ashley about what Michael Krasny has to say about whales. And having 2 college kids, if anybody needs any advice on raising kids.
Has anyone listened to Michael Krasny talk about whales? It's so fun. He gets so excited talking about whales. Anyway, I had a question about just being in this remote first world. It seems like you guys have adapted pretty well with all of your reporters just reporting from their living rooms or their basements. Did you guys take into account any of these things that have worked during this time, since you're also investing so much into this new building and kind of like a community center? Have you are you going to keep any parts of this, just kind of we have a lot of founders here who do exclusively work remotely with their teams just because they've started their companies during this year. Just might be kind of interesting to learn from a big organization like you guys.
That's a great question. And I'll tell you, we had a recent board meeting I like to share with my board, we have a board of 29 people. I like to share what keeps me up at night. And I'll tell you what's keeping me up at night is I don't know what life is going to be like when we get out of this pandemic, personal life and work life. Um, and I'll also tell you that when the pandemic hit, the idea that we are raising millions of dollars in the middle and we're constructing this building felt a little bit odd, to say the least, in knowing not knowing where we're headed. So yeah, we're really focused on what we've learned in this moment. And first of all, I'll tell you that I really do believe in personal connection for building culture. But there is no doubt that many of our staff have enjoyed the flexibility of schedule and the efficiencies that they're afforded and the power of technology. And we're learning about how to be inclusive in Zoom meetings. So we're absolutely taking that into account. We're going to spend more time talking about it. And I know that we're going to be pressed for our staff because they're going to want to know, are we all going to need to move in at once? Are we all going to need to be there together? Are you going to be more flexible with remote? Can some of us work remotely permanently? So that's going to be a challenge. But we know that because, it's going to be hard to break new habits and to walk back expectations. But I will say this, that we are absolutely going to be more flexible with remote working. The thing that I worry about in going to like a true hybrid model where people are permanently working remotely and some people are in the office, I worry about keeping people truly connected if, virtually, when a lot happens when you're in person, right? And this idea of making sure that you're engaging and including people when they're virtual. And I worry about the people who are working remotely, who feel like they're missing out on opportunities or feel like they might be judged by their managers because they're not coming in the office. So those are a lot of things to worry about and just a lot of things for us to take into consideration, because it is not going to be, we move back to the way it was, because, and I don't want things to go back to the way they were, because we're a different organization. And in some ways things are better, I think. One more thing to say, one of the big pivots in our building, I mentioned earlier that the building is not just for us and what we do in that building. Knowing that there are other nonprofits who are struggling. We are in conversations with a couple partner organizations about coming into our building, so availing it for mission-aligned partners. And the other thing that we are confidentially between the 13 of us talking about is building a podcast garage, which is all about inviting the community in, training them so that we can, invest our time into a broader ecosystem of makers who can eventually, bring back content to us. So again, it's space that won't just be for our benefit. So that's how we pivoted in that front. Sorry, long-winded answer to you, Ashley, but it is a complicated question. Andy, were you about to say something?
Yeah. I'm glad you brought up podcasts because I wanted to ask about podcasts. And one of my favorite podcasts that kind of got me interested in audio as a medium in general is Ear Hustle, which for anyone who doesn't know is a podcast that's produced by incarcerated people at San Quentin. And it really ties into a lot of the themes that you talked about in your talk. And I think it's just one of the most incredible examples of like elevating voices of marginalized people. And I wanted to ask, I guess, kind of two parts. One, what other programs do you know of that I should seek out? And two, how do we create more of these programs that just so directly take a group that is so far on the margins and elevate their perspectives so completely to the fore?
Let me say something about Ear Hustle. Earlonne Woods is the host. Our chief content officer, Holly Kernan, she used to lead the newsroom at KALW in San Francisco. And she took her staff into San Quentin to teach, prisoners there about how to, express themselves through voice and how to make podcasts. And she met Erlon. So she was actually the one who was responsible for the launch of Ear Hustle. And by the way, it's distributed by Public Radio Exchange. I mentioned earlier, I'm on that board. You're absolutely right. As I said, everyone can be a producer. And as I think about the next generation, and I think about my kids, what they're watching and listening to is really authentic, raw, real stories, like real storytelling. And I think that is a big opportunity for us. We are not a big, here's the challenge with podcasting. We're kind of seeing how it all shakes out. It's really hard for a podcast to be a hit. I think the statistic is the top 3% of podcasts have 95% of the audience, so there's a lot of experimental stuff going on. So, and we need to do more of that and make some small bets. One of our podcasts, which might not be really relevant, I don't know where you live. I live in Oakland, but we have a podcast called Right Nowish with a young Black host in Oakland. And what he does is he talks about makers and creators, uplifts people on the arts and culture scene in Oakland. It's just a pretty interesting podcast, worth a listen to. I think a lot of the stuff that PRX puts out there, distributes, are really strong. So just take a look at that. If you go to their website, take a look at that. I also love, I don't know if any of you ever listened to How I Built This with Guy Raz. I think that's a good one too.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks.
Yeah.
I put the link to Ear Hustle in the chat. If anyone wants to check it out, highly recommend it.
Oh, Chris put in the link as well. If no one else has a question, I'd love to hear candidly from all of you, as innovators and young creators. I say relatively young to our core audience. What is your perception of KQED? And when you hear KQED, what do you think of? For better or for worse? And I'd love to hear the for worse.
I consume a good deal of news, and I consume mainstream news, so CNN, Washington Post, New York Times, and those I lump into one bucket as driven by ad revenue, driven by number of eyeballs that they get by. And so I admittedly have a cynical view of kind of what our mainstream news outlets are. When I hear KQED in the car on the radio, I think of local. I think of a entity that is driven by the people and also corporations, but it seems mostly by the people. I see that reflected in the content. Like I'm not hearing things that are provoking me and getting me worked up, because that's what I usually hear on the main outlets. Yeah, that's what I think when I think KQED.
That's great to hear. What do you think? What do you think about when you hear the voice? Do we sound? Do we sound accessible and younger and diverse? It's a challenge, I think, with NPR that we've been talking to them about.
I typically hear an older voice. I personally feel comforted by that voice because it's almost like I'm not trying to say all your elders, but it is a seasoned, like authoritative voice that comes through those speakers when I listen to KQED.
Oh, great. Okay, thank you. Anyone else have any thoughts? I don't mean to use you all as a focus group, but if I can take the opportunity, I will.
I think I agree with that. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. Y'all, I'll wait. You go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think maybe someone like, I'm thinking about my parents, for example, might think of like KQED or like NPR in general as like a very liberal side of news. Whereas like I actually kind of feel like you guys are pretty like down the middle. I've also like listened to like once in a while KPFA, which is like super uber liberal, which maybe like, and not even necessarily like, sometimes you think of like liberal, the more liberal, the younger the audience. That's not even, I think I actually kind of see like KQED as being a very like millennial aged audience. Not so like it might be like too liberal for our parents, but like maybe not liberal enough for like Gen Z or whatever. Or is that are those the younger kids? I don't remember, but
Yeah.
But go ahead, Joshua.
Sure. No, I think it's a really interesting question. I've been thinking about this a lot myself because I consume a lot of media and in a way work in the space as well. So, I think things have shifted so suddenly in the last few years, I think it's less about, from my perspective, when I think about certain key brands, and KQED definitely has been NPR and KQ. I grew up on NPR in the Midwest and then listening to a channel there. So I have a lot of sense of the history of like NPR and like a lot of the programs over the years. And I've always had that was like a part of my growing up, in a sense of authority in news. And so I feel like many of us who did have that experience have those associations and know some of that history. So that's much like with the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or a lot of like, or CNN for a lot of people. So I think there's all that history, but in the recent years, the landscape of where we get news has so quickly evolved that I think how each outlet appears takes on a radically different appearance because everything else has shifted around it. And so that's something that I find just really interesting. And I don't know what always to make of this, but I found that my consumption of news I feel the necessity to consume many more channels of news than I used to in order to stay abreast of as much news as I feel I need to be an informed citizen. And I feel this way across several channels. Like I feel like used to be, you could read the New York Times and kind of know what a lot of informed people thought about what was happening in the world. But because of the fragmented news structure we now have, you're like, but what are people saying on Twitter? And the New York Times may be covering that or they may not be, but you kind of want to know. So you feel like you want to see this other channel or you want to know where these other channels, and I feel like that's affected KQED as well. So I really appreciate hearing the KQED perspective. And I don't want that to change in some ways because it's a known quantity,
Right.
But it's like our attention has had to be divided across more channels because there's so many different perspectives now that are going into mainstream understanding, and that's affecting politics and everything that's happening in the world. So I don't know that there's an answer, but I think that for me, then I feel like the fraction of my time I allocate to KQED has gone down because I'm allocating it across KQED, podcasts, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Twitter, individual bloggers and newsletters, like because that's what's happened on the landscape. And I don't know what the answer there is, whether you try to do more change or you maintain your role. But I think that's just an observation I've had over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. And from my perspective, you just want to be in the mix, For those of you who have a radio and you see the P1, I'd love us to be the P1 or the P2 or the P3, right? Because the reality is there's an abundance of content and choice, and we are so fragmented. And that's why when I said earlier, how we differentiate ourselves is with service journalism and trust. And I think really do believe that trust is, that is going to be a competitive advantage, right? You come to us for that. I'll also share with you, Ashley, to your point. We get all the time. You're so left, you're so liberal, and especially more than ever, because things are so politicized. And I know that our journalists struggle with it because we're in a time where it's, when did it become that when we're speaking up and covering issues that relate to fundamental rights, when did that become leftist? So it's a scary time. It's an interesting time, and we have hard conversations about, how hard do we call people out? How hard do we take points of view, right? And I tell you, the thing, as I just mentioned a couple minutes ago, trust is the most important thing that we have. And our job, our privilege is to cover what's happening, call it out bravely when it deals with fundamental rights, right? Or, morality matters, right? Call that stuff out, but offer it out and let people do with it what they may, right? It's our job. It's not our job to tell them what to do or push them in a certain direction. We got to maintain that. So we got to maintain that trust.
One thing I just on that point, which I feel like is there's another axis that's becoming more and more important in media, which is we often tend to think on the left to right axis of where media lie, and to have some sense of where these, on certain moral issues or issues where people have a little bit more of a principled point of view, they might be on one side or another, and they have skews depending on the channel. But more and more, because things have become so fragmented and because things have become less factually based in what a lot of people consume and believe, I do think the access, which is separate from moral positions on a lot of political topics that people may differ, is really more around factual versus just content and or engagement-based content. So a lot of what you consume on Twitter is engagement-based, like just stuff that people are saying. And so focusing on, and certain of the newer news organizations like OAN and things like this, a lot of it is not fact-based. So having more of the public discourse being around facts for fact-based media versus other media, and less about left and right at all, I think is a shift that we're seeing. And I don't know if it feels, I'd like to see that KQED would embrace that and just be like less about, oh, we're targeting this left of center kind of demographic, and it's more we're targeting the strong factually based demographic.
Yeah. It used to be we lived in a world where we had the same set of facts, right? And where we would debate and disagree is, our position on those facts. And now we don't have the same set of facts, and it's amplified by social media, and the power of social media. It can be so great, but I think about, we spend a lot of time with our kids telling them, it's so easy to get the immediate information, but you've got to think critically about the source and where it's coming from and stay curious, right? Because otherwise it's going to be hard to bring people. It's going to be challenging for us to bring people together because things are so divided. And I worry about that, I worry about them a lot.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Hi, on that, I think that touched a lot of the things that are really sort of my focus. And I apologize, I missed the first 25 minutes of this or so. I had another obligation, came in as soon as I could. So I apologize if you covered this already, but given what you just said, it sounds like it hasn't been discussed as much. And I think this question of like how to address sort of the issues of like misinformation and like I've actually been on KQED a few times to talk about this. And that was, and I think this relates to your other question around sort of what do people in our world think about this? So I may be an unusual person. I don't drive, never driven, never had a car, grew up in New York City. I never listened to radio. It just wasn't part of my life. Went straight to iPods or whatever. And so KQED wasn't a thing. Like the first time I really thought about it was when I was asked to be on it. And I think the rise of podcasts creates this interesting way to bring people like me, who that is the primary medium that we started consuming. We don't even have radios as physical devices in our homes or we don't have cars. Like I would think about, is there a way to work with, the other NPR affiliates, et cetera, to get local, and maybe this is in some podcast apps, it's not in the ones I've used. I've never been pushed to, I've never been shown in a podcast recommendation engine, here are the local podcasts. Here are the podcasts in your area. Here are the ones that are like even in your exact, like you can put in your city or, geolocates, whatever it's done. But I want to get recommendations that are local to my exact location, whether it be my neighborhood, my city, my state. And I think that you may have a voice to advocate for that if that isn't already a thing that you're doing. So that would be like my number one thing to bring the audio into the lives of people like me, who, I don't know. And then I have another point, but I'm just curious to hear your reaction to that.
Yeah, that is the challenge and the opportunity. And we actually have just started to dip our toe with NPR. I mean, we're part of the system, but we're more intentionally partnering on leveraging our strength of national and local. And there is a podcast called Up First, which has national and local coverage in it, right? What's interesting, it's only available in I think it's the top 13 markets, right? Because we still need spread that out to the rest of the system. And the hurdle to that is, there are, as I said earlier, 265 member NPR stations, many of them in small cities, and they just don't have the technical, facilities to get that out there, right? So
Yeah,
we also have a great partnership with Google News, right? We're on smart speakers.
right.
And so when you call up, tell me the news, we're teed up right away.
Yeah.
I think to your point about recommendations and getting ourselves teed up, our biggest challenge are the algorithms that are on there, the social media
Right.
platforms, which are all based on preferences as
No,
opposed
yeah,
to
this is what I do.
Yeah.
I like.
Oh, you could actually do the 25-minute presentation for me. I should ask it that way, right?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. But like, I guess the thing that jumps out at me on this is like, I want to. I mean, and maybe you're doing this, but I want you to like basically like strong arm like an Apple, you and every one of your friends, to be like your podcast app is you have a search feature. It should show things that are in your area, and that should not be part of. You shouldn't have to do anything. That should take zero involvement from any NPR station. It should just be a way that you can say this is a local podcast. Now, I'm not going to say there aren't ways in which that can be misused for misinformation, because there are, and I've already thought it's like 5 of them, because that's the other thing that I do. But I think that would. I mean, I would love to have Pocket Casts, et cetera, just to be able to see that. And you can work with a smaller provider first. Work with a Pocket Cast, just like, and by work with, I just mean like, give them a $10,000 grant to implement it, or like, 30,000 if that's what it takes, just to have some version of it. You can see the ROI, then you can bring it to your board. They've seen that there's an ROI of like, giving some money to do this to these small podcasters, small apps that have very little cash flow comparatively. And then they can say, okay, let's actually push for even regulation on this, even if you want, or whatever it is that you want to do. Because you push regulation, Apple's just going to do it. Like, if you get a nice letter from Congress of like, why, it's just still a little effort compared to the actual hard problems that Congress bugs these companies about. It's a simpler thing, but.
Well, I'll share a couple of things with you. I have been at Apple and talked to them about this, right? We are your neighbors. We're in your backyard. Experiment with
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Put us out there. And they are teeing us up on Apple News. But we're also pushing them on, and Google's doing this, is pay the publishers, right? So that, they can sustain themselves. And even more important than that, for public media organizations, give us the data so we can know and understand our audience. I'll tell you more broadly, and I know this is being recorded just for internally, the conversations, the challenges we're having as a system are that, people are saying, don't give our crown jewels away, right? And if you give them away and put them on that platform, they're not going to come through my station, and they're not going to become members of our station, right? And so what that does, it's like, we're not going to get the audience that's there. We have to be there. Like, it's not up to us, If we're not there, so that's the challenge. But and we have to we're just not big enough for them. Luckily, we are in their backyard, so we have a good partnership with both Google and Facebook. But we're not getting that data. We're getting like sorry, I keep interrupting you.
No. I've got a lag. I've got a completely different point, but I want to let someone else speak. Just media literacy. I'm happy to follow up with you later.
I want to share perspective. I guess it's interesting to hear different type of listeners' perspective. I listen to KQED, NPR all the time when I'm driving my car. I actually don't care about any other station, which not necessarily means that this is where I 100% go for my news or programming. But I do perceive it as this very comfortable to me, by default, somewhat moderately local type of liberal. What I mean by that is I realize that currently it's really hard for media. It actually started being hard for media in the past, I would say almost 10 years, when tech actually crushed media pretty big. And it was very hard for media to survive. And in order for media to survive, if everybody reports on the same fact, then it really doesn't matter if you go to KQED or CNN somewhere else, then nobody matters, right? And that's how you cannot make a penny, no matter what media you are. So unfortunately, media is sort of fencing users by creating info bubbles, by telling them what they want to hear, what they root for, this is a huge problem. And it happens to the biggest media sources that I hear right now being mentioned here. They literally chiming what they think will secure their users, keep going to them instead of to somebody else. That's the division. So I agree with Joshua that sticking with the facts is a great thing. It's hard, I understand. But what I like about KQED is this sort of, I understand the tough balance where, and this is why I said earlier that local liberal is okay in a sense in which this is the pulse of, let's say, Bay Area. I mean, it's liberal, and I like it that you do not do it in a way in which you're extreme liberal that knows has a wider coverage and has to fight for one side or the other. So I kind of like the balance. I like that it has like typical public station, all kinds of different shows and for nature, for whatnot, the space and this and that. I love that part. So I actually have a very, very positive experience. I'm European. To me, left or right means nothing. It's fake of what's going on here for left or right or whatever it is, this division. It's not real. So for a public radio, I would say, and the younger or older voice doesn't matter to me at all. In fact, I think Gen Z is okay with older voices. What Generation Z and part of millennials wants is give me something real, give me something I don't know. These are the two things. So it doesn't matter young or old, but as long as you guys do not go to too much of an extreme, and as long as it's as closer to facts as possible, and it's something in a way that locally fits the pulse without overdoing it, and kind of puts around, the typical shows that are for everybody, that it doesn't really matter left or right if it's about an educational show, I think it's good.
Okay, I just two observations on what you said. I just want to underscore, I talked earlier about our service journalism, who we are, serving the community, who we are, what we stand for, but it's that local thing, in this world of media where it's all the same facts, but we're local, right? And local is dying, and so that's going to differentiate us. And I'll just add on to for Gen Z, you mean what I need? I would just add the two other things that they want is they want it now, and they want us to read their minds, which is, so that's how we can best serve them.
Maybe it seems like they want you to read their minds. That's the attitude because they're spoiled of like, where's my this and I want this and I want that, right? That's
for sure,
right? But that should stop actually, because that did not bring to really good results in the past few generations of I want this and I want it my way and I'm going to go fast and I'm going to break things, because we broke things that shouldn't have been broken, and we went too fast, which means we were not educated enough to understand that it's not about this piece that you're disrupting. It's part of a whole chain that is connected to it and reverberates. So yeah, I don't know, stick to some certain principles. And as long as you're steady and you get information that is new and not just another echo chamber, I think is okay.
Thanks, I appreciate that. I saw that Andy left, but before anyone else leaves, I'm going to put in the chat my email address. If anybody wants to learn more, feel free to reach out at any time. The other thing is, I'm just going to take this opportunity to say that we are searching for a new vice president of product. So if you want to share that out with your networks, we're hoping to fill that soon. And again, if you want to hear more about KQED, our campaign that we're in, how you can help us, partner with us, support us, reach out anytime. And I'm very grateful for your time. And it sounds like you all listen and support what we do. So thank you for that.
Very cool. Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. And thank you everyone for asking such great questions and engaging today. Yeah, great. Thank you for coming. And thank you, Michael and Chris, for driving.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Stay safe, everybody. Okay, hope to see you again soon.
Thanks for organizing, Ashley,
Yeah,
too.
ditto.
Bye,
No problem, guys. Thanks, Josh.
See y'all.
Thanks, Ashley.
Bye-bye. Bye, Chris.